Well, the new AP poll top 25 is out, and there's naturally some change after another college football weekend. Washington and Oregon, the most hyped matchup of the week, saw the Huskies win in thrilling fashion, up 2 spots to number 5. So Kalen DeBoer, Michael Penix Jr. and company in the top 5. Oregon does drop down, but just 1 slot still in the top 10, coming in at number 9. Oklahoma and Penn State, and as I mentioned, Oregon all dropping at least 1 slot there in the top 10. North Carolina, hello to the top 10. If we go to 11 to 20, Oregon State with that big win over UCLA moves into the top 12. Notre Dame by victory over USC gets them 6 spots back into the top 15. And Lincoln Riley and company had already been trending downward even with wins, but the Trojans drop 8 spots from 10 to 18. And if we finally get to 21 to 25, we saw a lot of movement like Kansas, Washington State, Miami, and Kentucky, all now unranked. They were ranked last week. Air Force crashed for the party. Tulane and Iowa. UCLA, by virtue of their loss to the Beavers, does still stay in the top 25. The Bruins coming in at 25 in the latest AP Top 25 poll. All right, let's bring in Chip Patterson of the Cover 3 podcast to break down Sunday's announcement. So let's first start with that great Saturday game at Husky Stadium, Washington and Oregon. You saw the movement there, Chip. Does that sit right with you with how far Washington went up and Oregon slid backwards?
Right. So for Washington, they essentially jumped ahead of Oklahoma and Penn State. That move up is not punishing the Sooners. It is not punishing the Nittany Lions, who made work of UMass on Saturday. No, I think this is rewarding a Washington team who we all acknowledged that they had that high-powered offense. But I think the quality of the profile was one thing a lot of AP voters were looking for. You get a win against a team like the Ducks. That was sort of the last piece of making Washington a top 5 team in the eyes of the AP voters. And part of the reason why that win is so strong is because these same AP voters really believe that Oregon, even after a loss, is one of the top 1-loss teams in the entire country, dropping the Ducks right there to that Texas line. So you can almost pair up, right? That Washington and Oklahoma with the Texas and the Oregon. You know, not much change for the Ducks, I think, is very fair, especially with the way the game ended.
If we go in another high-profile game, which was Southern Cal and Notre Dame, where do you land on how high Notre Dame was able to get and then how far the Trojans dropped as well?
I think this is bad for the Trojans. I think this is a bad loss because you look at USC and you acknowledge what Caleb Williams can do, but now let's start to look at your resume, your profile. This stuff matters. The best win is against 4-3 Arizona. And look, they better be glad that Arizona was able to go into the Palouse and take care of the Cougs to be able to get above 500. USC to this point has just been beaten up on the bottom of the Pac-12, and I think that that is not an impressive profile when you start to rank them against other 1-loss teams. And so, yeah, you are going to be hurt by the fact that you lost to a 2-loss Notre Dame team, you know, unlike Oregon, which lost to an undefeated Washington team. But now let's start to look at where are the quality wins. The Trojans will have opportunities coming up right away. That run of Utah, Washington, Oregon, UCLA certainly stands out. But to this point is very difficult outside of their offensive excellence to make an argument for the Trojans as one of the top teams in the country.
All right, so a bigger loss for SC than maybe it is a win for Notre Dame in your eyes. If I were to ask you about Oregon State, DJ Uiagalelei and company took care of not only the Bruins, but now there's a scenario that they have in front of them with games that at the end are Washington and Oregon heavy there. What chance do you give them to having only that 1 blemish before they face those 2 powers?
Oregon State is able to ride with DJU, and when he's able to deliver like he has at the beginning of the season, like we saw this past weekend, then they're going to be able to have another layer. They're always going to be able to run the ball. Their defense has been a little hit or miss right here. I just think that the margin for error that Oregon State has right now is not so great that I'm going to give them a phenomenal chance to go the rest of the way with that only 1 loss. Great team that Jonathan Smith has, but the Pac-12 is too tough. You know, I mean, just go ask Colorado, which tried to go to sleep with a 29-0 lead against lowly Stanford. There are plenty of losable games left for the Beavers. That said, they have wound up on the winning side of some small margins before, so it's not totally out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, that at Arizona game all of a sudden becoming a little more difficult after what the Wildcats did to the Cougs there. If we get to ranked teams, look, there were a handful of ranked teams to lose. The Louisville one, which I actually did reference at the top of the segment here, was one that stood out because coming off of that high, of course, and then going on the road at Pitt, not only did they not cover, they lost. How bad of a loss was it for the Cardinals in your eyes?
Tommy, this is a devastating loss for Louisville's ACC title hopes, and that is because after we spent all week talking about how Florida State, North Carolina, and Louisville could all end up undefeated at the end of the year, we all went through our tiebreakers to figure them out, and one of them is common opponents, and Pitt is a common opponent. So if at the end of the season, Louisville does end up in a tie with Florida State or with North Carolina, look, the Tar Heels already have a win against the Panthers, so that would be a loss. Florida State plays at Pitt in early November. All three of these ACC title contenders all having to go face Pat Narduzzi. The Tar Heels have a win, but now the Cardinals have a loss. So it is going to be really difficult to imagine Louisville, which already had a nice path to be able to make it to the ACC championship game. Now they do not have a tiebreaker advantage. They're going to have to start rooting for some other teams to take down the Seminoles and the Tar Heels.
And if I were just to ask you, Chip, just your Chip Patterson ACC power rankings after wins from Florida State, Carolina, and Duke. And Duke, by the way, was still without Riley Leonard there. Where would you peg the ACC power rankings in your eyes right now?
Okay, so the Chipalytics would spit it out with like Florida State #1. We'd go North Carolina 2, Duke, and then not Louisville. I think the Clemson Tigers are being slept on right now. I know that they were off this past weekend, but look for Clemson to be in a position to work its way back into that top 25. You know, they were one of the 3 teams in the others receiving votes, which means that AP voters are starting to come around to a group who is a 2-loss team, and its only losses are to Florida State and Duke. As the Blue Devils continue to win, Clemson's profile stays strong. So I think that Clemson, to me, is the 4th best team in the ACC if we were going to do some power rankings. Bad loss for Louisville, but when we talked about them as an ACC title contender, a lot of it was because of its schedule. We did not think the quality of the team was on the same level as a Florida State or a North Carolina.
So out of the ranked teams that are no longer ranked, so I'm talking about Kansas, I'm talking about Washington State, Miami, and Kentucky here, which one was the most disappointing over the weekend for you?
Kentucky. I thought that Miami brought great effort, especially at the beginning of the game against North Carolina, showed that they had refocused after the colossal coaching collapse against Georgia Tech. But now we're starting to look at Kentucky and just say, okay, how much is that Florida win worth? Because it's the best thing that the Wildcats have going for them. Very inconsistent defensively, not exactly what we've been looking for from a Mark Stoops type program. Devin Leary, the transfer quarterback from NC State, hasn't really hit in the way that a lot of Kentucky fans expected. So, you know, Kentucky's a team that's going to have a lot of quality losses because of that SEC schedule. But as those quality losses start to pick up, then I think it's time that we get you out of the AP poll.
Chip, certainly appreciate it. Chip Patterson joining us here on CBS Sports HQ with the latest AP poll top 25. Chip, certainly appreciate it. As I had mentioned, taking a look at the notable movement, getting ready for next week. You've got Penn State and Ohio State. You got Tennessee and Bama, Duke and Florida State, as well as Utah and USC. Should be a good one. But again, UCLA and Louisville losing but staying within the top 25.